Please be seated. What now? What happens next? What happens after the shepherds return and Mary is left pondering and Joseph is wondering what to do with this infant lying in a food trough? What happens next? Well, it depends on which gospel you read. If you keep reading Luke, what happens is that 8 days later, Mary and Joseph take the baby to be circumcised and name Jesus. And then sometime later, on their way back to Nazareth, they stop at the temple in Jerusalem, where the devout Simeon and Anna, the prophet, praise the child in song. And then they return to Nazareth, and Jesus grows up. In the film version, there would undoubtedly be a montage at this point of Jesus doing a variety of kid things while something like Send Me on My Way by Rusted Root plays in the background. The next thing that happens in Luke is that Jesus, now a teenager, goes again with his parents to the temple for one of the annual festivals and disappears for 3 days. And then reappears. And then they go back home. And Luke says that he was, quote, obedient to his parents and matured in wisdom and years and in favor with God and people. It's all very cozy, isn't it? With minimal conflict and maximal praising and pondering. What happens next in Luke is reassuring. It's comforting. It's predictable. It's like the exact opposite of what happens in Matthew. If Luke is a Hallmark family movie, Matthew is a Guillermo del Toro dark adventure film. Because what happens next in Matthew is this: as soon as Jesus is born, strangers from faraway eastern lands suddenly appear. And we're never told how many there are, or where they come from, or what their names are. It's all very mysterious. But it's apparently not very subtle, because before long, Rome's puppet ruler Herod finds out and tries to enlist these magi into helping him find the child. You see, Herod is worried about this potential threat and wants it eliminated. But the mysterious strangers foil Herod's plot. They find Jesus, give him gifts, and then disappear back into the night whence they came. Herod becomes enraged and starts demanding the death of every child in the area under the age of 2. And then, just as the forces of darkness are closing in, Joseph has a dream which warns him to flee with his family to Egypt to escape Herod's wrath. And so they become refugees for several years. And even after they return, after Herod dies, they move far, far away from the center of power. And they take up residence in a remote part of Galilee. Not because that's where they're from in Matthew, but because that's where they feel safe. What happens next in Luke is tranquil. What happens next in Matthew is terrifying. What happens next for us? Will we go home and wake up tomorrow morning to a world that looks more or less familiar? We probably hope so, but these days we can't ever be sure, can we? I mean, maybe tomorrow will be fine, but what happens next week, or the week after that, or the week after that? Will we find ourselves drawn back into predictable routines? Or will we be called into unexpected journeys? Will the coming year be full of dramatic upheavals or quiet but steady growth? If we're honest, it's probably going to be a mixture of both. But here's what I want you to remember about both of these stories. In both Luke and in Matthew, God is present and active. God speaks and acts through shepherds and strangers, through the consistency of parental love, and through the perplexity of dreams. God shows up both in the temple and along the escape route, in the chaotic searching and in the quiet growing, in the midnight feedings and in the midnight fleeing. It's always tempting to wonder what's next. But I actually think Christmas demands that we ask a different question. Not what's going to happen, but who do we need to be? And what do we need to do in response to whatever comes next? Because another thing that Matthew and Luke share is that every character is transformed by their encounter with the divine. Shepherds become evangelists. Temple elders become prophets. Strangers bearing gifts become mysterious guardians. And a young girl and an older man are transformed into both protected parents and persecuted refugees. We are always changed when we draw near the Holy One. And so as we gather in the glowing wonder of this night, in the relative warmth of this sanctuary, in the midst of families and communities, many of whom are united, but many others are divided. As we gather amidst nations at war and refugees fleeing across borders and the climate in crisis, in the midst of all of that, I invite you to ponder these stories in your heart and consider what new role God is inviting you into. What unexpected messages might you be asked to carry? What need is out there that is so apparent that you simply have to respond to it? And how might divine hope be already shining through the cracks of your ordinary or even your extraordinary life? May the celebration of this holy night give each of us the courage and the confidence to face whatever comes next, and to say yes to the tasks that God needs us to do, and to know that whether the next part of your journey is through quiet and consistent growth, or through dramatic confrontations with the powers that be, or even through daring escapes, know that God will be with you wherever you go, always. Because Christ is born and God is among us. Amen.